I don't know, but no way to know how it'll go. I brought them visuals, but who knows what they're going to do with them. And they've talked to a lot of other people, including Michael Shermer.
The all-star of the sculptors. Did you
Yes, I did. I did see it, and it was well done. You can say that. I'm presuming you haven't lost your brain, so.
Welcome, everybody.
Do I retreat from the back?
Welcome, everybody, to the kickoff lecture to the
Before the eggs
2007
and the
International
tomatoes.
MUFON Symposium. The first speaker is not only a dear friend of mine, but if you haven't seen him lecture before, he is an amazing researcher, an amazing lecturer, and really keeps your attention. He's one of the foremost experts on the Roswell incident, and here to talk about the 60 years after the Roswell incident is nuclear physicist Stanton T. Friedman.
Well, that's one hell of it. Okay. I know you're anxious to get this over with so you can eat. I should point out that I wrote a paper for the symposium. It's one of the rules. If you're a speaker, you got to submit a paper. It's included in the conference proceedings, symposium proceedings. I strongly recommend that you get the proceedings. There are a lot of good papers in there. And I'm not going to read mine, so if you want to find out what I wrote, you have to get the proceedings. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to say, because that's one of the fun things about being a speaker. You sort of make it up as you go along. The topic is 60 years after Roswell. And I've spoken at more MUFON symposia than anybody over the years, which means I'm one of the older people around. I always chide John Schuessler that he is older than I am, so I'm not quite the oldest one in the house. But a lot's changed in the world since 60 years ago. I know you're all 60 years older, those of you who were around then, but that's not what I mean. It's not only technology that has changed, it's our thinking about a lot of things. And it happens gradually, so that sometimes we need to look back and suddenly realize that, hey, things really have changed. You can adjust to small amounts of change per year, and you hardly notice the difference. But there are things that are relevant to UFOs that do make a difference and that have changed. Now, what I did to prepare for the lecture is I grabbed a bunch of slides and stuck them in a box, and then I put the slides in a tray, and I rang the bell. And this is an old slide, as you can see, after 37 years, and really now it's 49 years. But my conclusions haven't, and can you read that? I have trouble reading it, but I've got a little screen in front of me so I can read it. My four major conclusions, and they're still the same, except the number of years has changed. And I have to start my lecture this way, so there'll be no question as to where I stand. I think most of you know where I stand anyway, but first, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline that word some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. We don't care about them. I don't care about them. Secondly, the subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate. That does not mean that everybody working for the government knows what's going on, just as not everybody knew about the political Watergate. It means that some few people have known for at least 60 years that some UFOs are alien spacecraft. The third conclusion is that there are no good arguments against the first two conclusions. Well, they all sound good. The debunkers are facile speakers. I have to ask, how many people saw the Larry King UFO special? How many heard the debate on Coast to Coast radio between myself and Dr. Michael Shermer? Well, the rest of you missed something. You didn't see me in my pajamas downstairs, of course, because it was 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. my time, but the results are worth noting. I got 80% of the vote, and Michael got 20%. I didn't say that to brag, but to indicate that you can take on these blankety blanks and be victorious, no matter how sharp they seem to be on the surface. So fear not, truth will out. And of course, I'm expecting some big attack from the Skeptic Society any day now, but if you hear from anybody wanting dirt on me, let me know. We'll give you a lot of dirt. It is interesting that they reran that show twice, I guess, because of public demand, whatever that's supposed to mean, or maybe Larry didn't want to do another show that night, or, I don't know what it means, but okay. I'll run through the slides because there are certain points I want to make that aren't on slides, but there are a couple of zingers in here. That's Ryan Wood's term. Ryan, where are you? Zingers. Let's look at the next. Oh, I've got the control. Isn't that smart? This modern world is making life tough for me. Where do I aim it? Okay, where do I aim the control to change it? Everybody sleeping back there? Well, I've got the device. You're supposed to push a button. Nicole! Oh, well. I've got some Roswell-related stuff, and one of the areas that, well, there's several. Now, can anybody tell me what that says? I don't know if that was the next one, but we'll try it. I get a kick out of dealing with debunkers. Some people say I must enjoy it. I don't enjoy it, but it's one of those dirty jobs that somebody has to do, and I seem to be elected for it, so I'll do it. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. That's rule number one. But the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation, because investigation is too much trouble. And then there are all the corollaries. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence, because looking is too much trouble. Dr. Shermer says, where's a body? Where's a piece of a saucer? He doesn't have one, so they must not be real. And if I watch a 747 go over, if I don't shoot it down and bring it to him for his lab, it didn't go over. All believers are liars. We all know that. All non-believers only tell the truth. Believers are only involved for the money. Non-believers turn over all their money to charities. I would point out that Michael is the publisher and editor of Skeptic magazine, and if you read at the back, there are loads of ads for all kinds of things you can buy from Skeptic. And I don't think that money goes to charity somehow. The proper way to do UFO document research is from one's armchair. Archival visits are too much trouble. And you can defame dead people since they can't be sued for libel. Can't sue for libel. And it goes on. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there's an awful lot of garbage passing for research all over the place on the part of the nasty, noisy negativists, as I prefer to call them. Now, if they were anti-nuclear, then it would be nasty, noisy, nuclear negativists. You know, I like alliteration. Let's see what happens. Well, it says forward. Usually you push a button when it says forward, and you go backward. Oh, I couldn't resist showing in a slide I have, Earthlings and Aliens, welcome to Wal-Mart. That's the 50th anniversary of Roswell, incidentally. I was there for the 60th anniversary. They're still welcome. Now they have a Sam's. They're growing. I still don't know where I'm supposed to be pushing this thing. In the next slide, we'll go back to the old standby. Is there an engineer in the house? I like this one because my book is Crash at Corona. This is in the little town of Corona. UFO fans, forget Roswell. It all happened here. They were delighted with the title of my book, Crash at Corona. Well, maybe it needs new batteries. I don't know. There's a map of New Mexico. All you need to know is New Mexico is the 5th largest state. It has not many people. White Sands Missile Range is huge. Roswell's over there someplace. Albuquerque's up there. Roswell's 200 miles from Albuquerque, Amarillo, El Paso. And yet the museum has had over 2.4 million visitors. And I mention that to show that people are interested. If you're in Roswell, it's because you want to be there. It's not on the way to anywhere. Okay, go back to the old-fashioned way. And I mention that because there's slowly growing recognition, because of something that happened earlier this year, that people are interested in UFOs, not just some fringe group. The Chicago Tribune on January 1st carried a front-page story by John Hilkovich about the sightings at O'Hare Airport on November 7th last year by United Airlines employees. Now, the sighting was interesting. A round object seen beneath the cloud level, drilled a hole in the clouds when it left. The story was well done. It got 1 million hits on the Trib website, more than anything they've ever published about anything. It led the list for 4 days, which has never happened before. And Hilkovich got calls from all over the world to be interviewed, serious calls. And even the Trib made a note of this astonishing result that, hey, there's a lot of people interested in flying saucers out there. What do you know? What's important about that is newspapers are hurting for circulation, so a lot of other newspapers, a lot of other news media picked up on this fact. And we had a lot more coverage of the story of the French putting their sightings on the web, of Fife Symington admitting that he lied back in 1997. He indeed saw the Phoenix lights, not the flares, but the lights at 8:15, 8:20. There's a story about that sighting by 2 pilots near the Channel Islands off England. Got quite a bit of coverage. CBS Sunday Morning News tomorrow will carry a semi-feature story on UFOs. I spent 18 hours going down to New York and back. I was interviewed for an hour and a half. They tell me the piece is going to be 8 minutes long, and I know they talked to a bunch of other people, but that's unheard of. Roswell was crawling with newsmen for the 60th anniversary. So we have an opportunity to let the world know that there's really something going on. Stick to the facts, stick to the data, but there's something going on. Maybe this is our opportunity finally. There was a piece on the Today Show that played it straight. Hannity and Combs, is that his name? Something like that, had a straight piece. The world is changing. It's our opportunity. We shouldn't be shy about it. Tell it like it is, but tell it. Don't forget. Next slide, please. See, the old-fashioned way works. Everybody said, Stan, you're a dinosaur using slides. Nobody uses slides anymore. Use modern new technology. This is a video slide projector. The whole point of this picture is to show you that out in New Mexico, not far from Roswell, it looks like that. There's not much there. There's a lot of nothing there. People want to go out to the site. What for? There's tens of thousands of square miles that look just like it. And I don't know whether they have more or less rattlesnakes and scorpions, but there's no AAA out there. Your cell phones, many of them won't work out there. I don't recommend it as a fun trip. If something goes wrong, you're in deep trouble. Let's look at the next slide. Now what? Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, now I on my website, www.stantonfriedman.com, I have a paper called Government UFO Lies. And it covers, the CIA, the FBI, the Air Force, the NSA, everybody lies. And this is one of the statements I get a kick out of. This is from Colonel Sheridan Cabot. He went out there with Jesse Marcel. And for years saying, oh no, I wasn't there. I wasn't even on the base at the time. And finally he comes clean, it says here. The area of this debris was very small, about 20 feet square, and the material was spread on the ground, but there was no gouge or crater or other obvious sign of impact. I remember recognizing this material as being consistent with a weather balloon. We gathered up some of this material which would easily fit into one vehicle. Now that is one of the most bald-faced lies I have ever seen. In the first place, in my first conversation with Jesse Marcel, he said it covered an area about 3/4 of a mile long and a few hundred feet wide. In the second place, if that's all there had been, the rancher would have brought it into town and there would have been no reason for Marcel and Cabot to go following him out there. In the third place, somebody forgot to tell him, hey, it's a mogul balloon we want, not a regular balloon. A mogul balloon has 20 balloons and sonobuoys and other equipment of all kinds, stretches out over 500 to 600 feet. No way in the world you're going to get that into one vehicle. But it doesn't matter. It was in the Air Force report. The New York Times bought it. Truth doesn't matter. They will lie if they can get away with it, and they have. Partly because we haven't made enough noise about the lies. They haven't been held to account. It is interesting that the big Air Force report, the guy who wrote it, Colonel Weaver, his specialty was disinformation. And he demonstrated that he was good at that. Let's look at the next slide. I don't know how many of you saw me on a crazy sci-fi channel program with Al Franken and Ice-T and Jim Mars and other lights. And Al Franken makes the wisecrack that couldn't have been much of a story that Roswell crashed because, after all, it was only in that little Roswell newspaper. I had sent them a pile of newspaper articles from major newspapers. He was supposedly given the pile. He didn't bother to read it. So I had to point out, this is the Chicago Daily News, in case you're wondering, which is a little bigger than the Roswell Daily Record. Let's look at the next slide, please. Army finds air saucer, you saw that. Here's the Roswell paper. Army captures flying saucer and ranch in Roswell region. Let's look at the next slide, though. That's my favorite, the Los Angeles paper. You don't get headlines like that very often. Army finds flying saucer. General believes it is radar weather gadget. Air Force says platter picked up on ranch. Platter, I like that. And the article goes all the way down the rest of the front page. Doesn't look like the Roswell paper to me. And let's look at the next one. Oh, you can't see the headline up top. It's the Sacramento Bee. Oh, well, we find it in New Mexico. Let's look at the next one. At the next slide, please. That's a nice one, too. Spokane Daily Chronicle. Army declares flying disc found. A little bigger paper than the Roswell Daily Record. Let's look at the next slide. Now, here's the Air Force wasn't satisfied with lying 4 hours after the first story came out. They actually staged the launch of a weather balloon radar reflector combination over in Alamogordo for the press. It says so. Newsmen watch. Fantasy of flying disc is explained here. All three of these pictures deal with it. Here is a radar reflector there and the weather balloon. Now, maybe that's what Cabot thought he was supposed to say. Ain't no mogul balloon looks like that. And nobody ever found any string. There were 20-foot hunks of string between each pair of balloons going on up. But why let the facts get in the way of a good cover story? Let's look at the next slide. Oh, we hear about this story. This is July 9th. The others were July 8th. This is the only thing that the skeptics or debunkers, deniers, whatever you want to call it, dedicated deniers, how's that? Where the rancher was reprogrammed. The last thing in the story, of course, it says, one thing he's sure of is it wasn't a weather balloon. We neglect that, of course, in all the future explanations. The early stories all said found last week. Suddenly we've got a June 14th date in there to try to fit it into some hypothetical balloon launch. What I'm saying here is if the major media would use half the brains they supposedly have, they would see immediately that the government's been lying through its teeth about Roswell and many other aspects of UFOs. But this one, you don't have to look very hard. Let's look at the next slide. Famous picture, Jesse Marcel with some of this phony, it's real balloon wreckage, but it sure isn't mogul balloon wreckage, taken in General Ramey's office. And the next slide, which is famous for something else, the next slide, please. Well, you can barely see it here. The slide, it looks better. This is that famous Ramey memo. And the Air Force says, oh, we gave it to a government agency, and they couldn't read anything on it. How incompetent are the government agencies? Dr. David Rudiak's able to read it. Anybody who looks at this, and I had scans made of the original negative, there's definitely print on there. There's definitely words on there, including things like victims of the wreck. But the Air Force can't read it. Let's look at the next slide. And the next slide, yeah, those aren't words. They're even in English, you can tell. This is turned over, incidentally. But if that was a digital picture, you couldn't read it. So 3 cheers for non-digital technology is what I say. Let's look at the next slide, please. Now, you saw a picture of General Ramey and Thomas Jefferson Dubose. He was his chief of staff. Ramey was head of the 8th Air Force. The 509th in Roswell was under the 8th Air Force. The chief of staff was Thomas Jefferson Dubose. This is Tommy Dubose. I went out and I decided to see if I could find him. I didn't know if he was alive or not, but I checked with West Point. Figured he might be an officer from West Point. He was. They told me he was still alive. I managed to locate him down in Florida. I visited with him. He's on the film Recollections of Roswell. I mention this because I'm saying you do research. You don't just sit in your armchair. Great guy. He was 87, I think, when this picture was taken. And his name comes up in another context I just want to briefly mention. There's a new book out, Witness to Roswell, by Tom Carey and Don Schmidt. A lot of new data, a lot more witnesses have been found. And there is an affidavit from Walter Haut, who was the guy who put out the press release in the first place. And in that, he mentions that at the morning meeting on July 8th, the date of those newspaper articles, Walter put out the press release, that General Ramey and Tommy DuBose were there. And what I want is some confirmation of that, because in my last conversation with Tommy, he told me he likes what I'm doing. If he remembers anything else, I'll tell you, because what can they do to me now? When you're that age, you can say that. And so I would like to find records. People keep asking me about the affidavit. Walter Haut was not a liar. He could have been mistaken. I would like backup for the fact that Ramey and DuBose were there. So we're looking for flight logs, things like that. So that one is still in my gray basket. Next slide, please. Tommy DuBose told me about his conversation with General McMullen, 2-star, you notice. Ramey was only a 1-star. And in that conversation, Tommy told me that McMullen gave him 3 orders. Get the press off our back, I don't care how you do it. Send some of that wreckage up here today with one of your Colonel Couriers, and I don't want you ever to talk about it again, not even with your buddy Roger Ramey. That's an order. Do I need to put it in writing, Colonel? No, sir. When a 2-star general tells a colonel what to do, both from West Point, incidentally, they do it. But I got that straight from Tommy. That's not a third-hand story, fourth-hand, fifth-hand, one-on-one, 3 feet away. Next slide, please. There's Colonel Blanchard. And I mention this only because we hear these cockamamie stories. Blanchard was a loose cannon. Well, he only got a bunch more promotions to get up to being a 4-star general after this event. He was Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force when he died of a massive heart attack. Along the way, he was head of operations for the Strategic Air Command. Under his command, there were lots of nuclear weapons, thousands of them. You can call him a loose cannon if you want, but he was a big guy, fun-loving guy. He had established an outstanding record. Calling him a loose cannon is easy. Demonstrating it isn't so easy. Demonstrating he was an outstanding officer is very easy. Let's look at the next slide. Well, this is from a New York Times obituary, and it goes on quite a ways down here. And there was a huge service at the Air Force Academy. This was one well-established military leader. Next slide, please. There's Bill Moore, who's been much maligned. I haven't talked to him in years, not that I don't want to, but he and I did the bulk of the early work on the Roswell incident. He was a very hard worker. He did some strange things on occasion, and he played some games, disinformation and what else, but he did one heck of a lot of research, not from his armchair. Sometimes on his motorcycle, but not from his armchair. And Bill, along with our buddy Jamie Chandere, got the MJ-12 documents. Let's look at the next slide. In the next slide, a bunch of us were gathered by a Japanese crew down in Roswell. Some of us are still alive. Here's Walter Haut. He isn't. This is Jesse Marcel Jr. You saw him on the Larry King show. I really resent the fact that the Peter Jennings show, mockumentary I call it, when I'm being polite, they interviewed him, but they didn't bother to say that he was a colonel, that he was a medical doctor, that he was a flight surgeon, that he was a helicopter pilot. He's got a new book out, Legacy of Roswell, or The Roswell Legacy. I wrote the foreword for the book. Here's a man with incredible credentials, and they didn't bother to let you know. Incidentally, he flew over 220 combat hours. He was brought back in at age 68. He's in the practice of medicine. He is 71 now. Outstanding individual. And trained observers don't count. They're no better than untrained observers, says Michael Shermer, which is one of those silly things that when you think about is utterly ridiculous. Let's look at the next slide. 3 more witnesses, real people. Loretta Proctor is still alive, not in good health. She handled pieces of the wreckage. Her brother was on the flight crew that flew the stuff to Fort Worth, Texas. Real people tracked down by people spending a lot of effort. Peter Jennings said the witnesses crawled out of the woodwork. Called me a promoter twice in my 20 seconds of fame. They interviewed me for over an hour. I wish they'd paid my phone bill when Bill and I were trying to find people before the internet. I hate to tell you this, there was some life before the internet. And it was hard work finding people. Anyway, let's look at the next slide. Sappho Henderson, her husband handled pieces of the wreckage. Carl Flock didn't like him. He was a practical joker, so he made up a story and handed around a piece of a V-2 rocket that he was saying was Roswell wreckage. He didn't talk to anybody in the family. I did. They all knew about the piece of V-2 rocket wreckage. But we can dismiss his testimony. He flew 50 missions in Europe, incidentally, during World War II. Next slide. Good friend of Pappy, John Kromschroeder, dentist. Pappy handed him a piece of the wreckage, which he had to give back, unfortunately, and we don't know where it is. His testimony is on record, too. They shared an interest in strange materials, incidentally. He's gone now. Next slide. There's Jesse Marcel Jr. again. He looks a little older now. A year in Iraq is enough to age anybody. Next slide, please. That's out in the plains of St. Augustine, and there are people who deny that anything happened out there. Something did. You see it in Crash at Corona. Stories there. Next slide. It's a beautiful area. And what happens when you have money, I don't, but Bob Bigelow, who's in this picture there somewhere over here, he wanted to go along on some of our research trips, and I got a research grant from him. And he says, why don't we take a helicopter down there to the plains? I said, okay, let me find out what it costs. $2,000. I checked. Said, fine, let's do it. It's kind of nice when you get that kind of support, frankly. And it was a heck of a lot shorter trip than driving down there. That's a rented helicopter. The news was not a news helicopter. Next slide, please. That's what it looks like out there, these 85-foot dishes. There's 27 of them on a big Y. This was in Contact in the movie. They don't use it for searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. And incidentally, one of the sillinesses of the whole SETI thing is they assume the aliens are using the same technology we would use. Except what is that technology? It turns out that every one of those dishes is now being converted from analog to digital. So if they're sending out AM signals and you're listening on FM, you ain't going to hear nothing. And that's one of the key points today. In the past 60 years, do you realize how much technology has changed? For the younger people, do you realize there was a day when there wasn't an internet? When you didn't have computers at home? Where there was no jet travel? There were no microwaves? No cell phones? No space program? No satellites? No weather satellite data? And perhaps more importantly, our concept of where we fit in the scheme of things. The smart people told us that planets were created by a near miss between two stars, pulling pieces out of one. And the trouble is, stars are very far apart, so we're probably the only ones around. And now we know planetary formation is a natural part of the formation of many stars, and we've only discovered 240 or so planets in the near local neighborhood, and that number is going to go skyrocketing when our better equipment shows up. And people are always asking me, well, if they found planets around Zeta Reticuli, my favorite Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli. This is from the Hill case. There's a brand new book out. I'll put in the plug. Captured. Kathleen Marden is Betty's niece. All kinds of new information here that's never been published. I'm the co-author. She did most of the work. But I handle the star map work, and I point out that Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli are the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars in our whole local neighborhood. They're only 1/8 of a light year apart. That means those two stars are 35 times closer to each other than our star, the sun, is to the next star over. We're out in the boondocks, folks. And those two stars just happen to be 1 billion years older than the sun. I would think there would be more incentive. They're sun-like stars, that's true, of only 5% of the stars in the neighborhood. There'd be more incentive for travel to the stars when you got a next-door neighbor when there's nobody close by. Especially if you got a 1 billion-year head start on us. Because technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. You see, one of the other things that's changed is the intelligentsia of 1947 would tell you, well, the British Astronomer Royal, even later than that, said space travel is utter bilge. Lee DeForest, very important in the development of vacuum tubes for radio and stuff, television. He said the notion that man would go to the moon, pick up rocks, bring them back to Earth for analysis here is the wildest science fiction, worthy of a Jules Verne. I am bold enough to state that no matter what the discoveries of the future, that will never happen. That was said in 1957. Took 12 years before it happened. And I say this to point out that we like to have strange vision. We don't look at all the instances in which the authorities told us stupid things and that they were totally wrong and long delayed our new progress. Was it IBM said that there wouldn't be a use for more than a few computers in the world? I think Bill Gates says, who needs more than 64K memory? My wife bought a new computer a couple years back with a 200 gigabyte hard drive for keeping family pictures on it. And if I had said that 40 years ago, you say, Stan, they're waiting for you with the nets outside. That's crazy. Yeah, I worked with computers at General Electric in the 50s, not just slide rules, which nobody knew what I meant when I mentioned that at a college class. The computers filled the whole room, loads of air conditioning, and you'd get a ton of paper back, cost you $500 an hour. And again, 64K was about standard memory. That was 50 years ago. I stress this to get back to one thing about Zeta Reticuli for a minute. Seth Shostak says, oh, we looked at Zeta Reticuli. There's nothing coming from there. This is 10 years ago, you understand. Have we looked for planets? Sure, but you can't see ones the size of Earth now. Yet. Soon, we will be able to. Now, let me tell you a little story. A German general in 1938 had reports that the English were building tall towers, over 200 feet tall, with cross masts on them. Smart general that he was, this is before the war started, he said, look, we're working on radar in secret. The English must be building radar systems. We got to find out what their characteristics are, so when we finally attack them, we can jam the radar, we can foul things up for them. So they sent, of all things, the Graf Zeppelin, well over 600 feet long, flying along the channel at 70 miles an hour, listening past all these towers. They didn't hear a darn thing. Must be a mistake. Let's do it again. So they did it again. They still didn't hear anything. Well, I guess the English aren't building radar. The English were building radar. Oh, yeah, they tracked the Graf Zeppelin and everything else. But they used a frequency 10 times different from what the Germans thought would be used. Here are two societies that grew up alongside each other, that people went to universities in the other one. They were Queen Victoria's cousins, were related to the Kaiser. And we smart people couldn't figure out what the other guy was doing. And it was extraordinarily important to England that the Germans not know that the English had radar signals. And so we're going to figure out what technology aliens are using? And we're going to presume they're sending a signal to attract our attention? Well, sure, just like Columbus did before he headed west to the New World. Didn't he send smoke signals for the Indians? I mean, you know, some of this is pretty darn silly, frankly. Oh, let's look at another slide just for kicks. There's the Air Force report, about 1,000 pages of nonsense and lies. And well, it's true. I mean, you know, they lie about me. They lie about Jesse Marcel. Bob Pratt's wife is here, the late Bob Platt, one of the finer reporters on UFO stuff. And they make it sound like Jesse Marcel went to the Inquirer to get their attention because, oh, I got a crash saucer back then. I'm the one who gave Bob Jesse's address because Bill Moore and I had already talked to 62 people about Roswell and the new book was coming out. Jesse didn't go running to them. Bob was a fine reporter, but the Air Force lied. That's not the only lie. There were a bunch of them there. And it didn't matter because the press bought the lies. That's true of propaganda, whether it's Hitler's, no, I'll get shot for this one, or the United States Air Force is. But it's the same problem. Let's look at the next one. Oh, this is what he said. I won't read it. It's in the paper. He defamed Jesse Marcel, basically, too. Let's look at the next one. I don't want to read that out to you. They said in that report that that was their last word on Roswell. Nope, they lied again. They came out with the Roswell report, case closed. Now, this is one of my all-time favorite UFO non-explanations. And now, I didn't realize it until I watched the program myself, but the Larry King show kept showing those crash test dummies. When you're on the show, you don't know what the public is seeing. We're crowded around the table and trying to make sense out of what's happening, which is not easy. This has the crash test dummy explanation. Let's look at the next slide, if you're wondering what a crash test dummy is. The dummy's the one in the middle. A Sierra Sam. Now, I located this man who was in charge of the program. You know, you got to go out and find people. He's a retired colonel, Madsen. And he made it clear to me that, Stan, look, for the test to be meaningful, the dummies had to be the same height and weight as pilots. They were 6 feet tall and they weighed 175 pounds. And somehow the Air Force has them morphing from that to a little guy 4 feet tall with a big head. That's a pretty neat trick because in order to do it, they used time travel. See, none of the crash test dummies were dropped until after 1953. Well, people's memories were wrong. Some newsmen had the gall to ask, well, when did they drop these? Oh, 1953 and after. Wasn't Roswell in 47? Yes, but people's memories are confused. They got away with the lie. That's what matters. Let's look at the next one. Oh, another lie. A great pilot named Kittinger. I had twice independently heard the story of a nasty red-haired officer in connection with Roswell and a black sergeant. Well, Kittinger came forward, undoubtedly pushed a little bit by his Air Force buddies. He was that redhead. He was redheaded back then, and there'd been an accident near Roswell, and they wound up at the base hospital, which is one of the places where I'd heard about the story. Oh, that's neat, except for one little detail. It happened in 1959. So we have crash test dummies being time traveled, and we have red-haired, nasty SOB pilots being time traveled from 59 to 47. Doesn't matter. They got away with it. Next slide, please. One of the I-beams. This is supposed to be just toy manufacturer tape with toy symbols, strange symbols on it that the government used to hold the balloons together for Project Mogul. This is based on Jesse Marcel's recollection. He handled the piece. He dealt with the Dr. Moore, Charlie Moore, who tried to pull off this explanation. It's amazing, with all the Air Force reinforcements, yeah, they couldn't find reinforcement tape that matched what they were saying it was. There's none of it in the pictures taken in Ramey's office. Another lie bought by the noisy negativists of the world. Let's look at the next slide. Now, we do have some media who pay attention to Roswell, and they think it will increase their circulation. This was Time magazine, 1997. Nobody has ever described an alien looking like that. Notice the long nose, sexy lips. And you notice how big the type is in Time magazine. Roswell Files. Buy this magazine because it's about Roswell. It was their biggest circulation issue in 1997 until Princess Diane died. They weren't giving them away, they were selling them. Who's making the profit here? Popular Mechanics. Roswell, startling new evidence. That was more baloney. I won't go into details. It came out of left field. The next one is one of my favorites. Next slide, please. Skeptic. Roswell. How a minor incident became a major event of some kind, they say. They have sheep there. Now, this is supposed to be the Roswell incident. The Brazel Ranch had sheep, but it was not an intact craft. There was an intact one out in the plains of San Augustine, but that's clearly not here. Gross misrepresentation. And the article is even worse. And I published an article in UFO Magazine about these noisy negativist pronouncements from on high. But Michael Shermer isn't a skeptic. He's a denier, a debunker. Somebody who doesn't care about the truth. He's taken a position. And didn't bother to do any homework before he debated me. And if we debate again, I suspect he still won't. Well, everybody who listens to the George Noory show is obviously a believer anyway, so the fact that he got as much as 20% of the vote means he did a great job, right? That's what he would say anyway. Let's look at the next slide. Oh, can't see it very well, but that's Mr. Santilli with the Roswell autopsy. Which is a movie in England showing that this was all a fraud. The guys who made the dummies came forward and so forth. But the noisy negativists will point to this as the reason for people believing in Roswell, that crazy autopsy. Read my book, and you'll see that I certainly wasn't buying into Mr. Santilli. And I met him twice in England. I checked on the crazy things he said. Like that President Truman shows up in some of the footage. Dallas, he said. Did you check with the Truman Library? Oh, yes. Well, I did. I know the people there. Truman wasn't in Texas or New Mexico in the summer of '47. Then he came up with a second story. Oh, it was on his way to Ottawa. Except he doesn't know his geography. Ottawa is north of Washington, and that was a very public trip, and he was on a train. Hardly on the way to Roswell. But why let the facts get in the way of a good story? Fox News had the gall to run the alien autopsy footage, and then later on ran a program about great hoaxes in ufology, and that was one of them. You know, heads I win, tails you lose. It's very straightforward. Let's look at the next one, please. And the next one, that's the body. Next one, with big ears, incidentally. Next slide, please. That's an Italian one. That made noise all over the world, incidentally. And I got a trip to England out of it, so I guess I shouldn't complain. Next slide, please. That's the first book on Roswell. It was claimed in here by a source to Berlitz that Buzz Aldrin had sightings on the moon of a UFO. He sued because it hurt his reputation. He was selling used cars for a Cadillac dealer at the time, incidentally. And since there was no substantiation, he won. he collected. So that's one of the reasons I wasn't fussing about what he said the other night on Larry King. I knew he wasn't going to tell about any UFOs that he saw. It was going to be an IFO, no matter how you sliced it. And don't ask me to try to psychoanalyze Buzz Aldrin. A great astronaut, major contributor to the space program. But when it comes to UFOs, let's talk to somebody else. Let's look at the next slide, please. Now, one of the big arguments is the government can't keep secrets. This would be one of the greatest discoveries in man's history. They certainly couldn't keep it secret. The first nuclear chain reaction at Stagg Field in Chicago with Enrico Fermi and his associates is one of the great milestones in scientific development. Not a word in public. Of course there wasn't. It had military implications. First step toward an atomic bomb. That little gem over there is called Jumbo. Not Dumbo, Jumbo. Somebody felt that if the first nuclear weapons test was a dud, we'd lose all that $1 billion worth or so of plutonium. Maybe we should test it inside a big cylinder. Foot-thick walls, 20 feet long. Let's look at the next slide. You'll see how big it really is. Next slide, please. That was moved in secret from Ohio to New Mexico. You can't hide that in the trunk of your car, to say the least. As a good, cool sense prevailed, it was hung up a little way from where the test was run, and it survived, incidentally. But yes, you can keep secrets. All kinds of stuff is being kept secret all the time. Let's look at the next slide. These are the famous blacked out documents. Now, of course, governments can't keep secrets. A group of us called Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, and Brad Sparks will be speaking on Sunday, who was one of the founding members of that group, went after the CIA. We want all your UFO stuff. This is back in the 70s. We don't have any UFO stuff. You do too. We do not. We appealed. They deny. We go to court. The judge says do a search. They come back. Oh, gee, look what we found. 900 pages of UFO materials. Oh, and here's a list of 79 documents from other agencies which we can't release. Oh, 18 of them from the super secret National Security Agency. So we go after the NSA, Freedom of Information. We want these 18 documents. You can't have anything. Sources and methods. We are prevented by law from releasing any of this information. Go away. We appeal. They deny. We go to court. Judge says do a search. I mean, 18 isn't a big number. They come back to court. How many documents about UFOs did you find, gentlemen? 239, Your Honor. 239? Oh, but a whole bunch of those, 70 of those, were from other agencies. We can't release those. Wound up being 156 that were their documents. Well, fine, we'll take those. You can't have them. National security, sources and methods. Go away. Well, we're getting nowhere. The judge, we tried a legal ploy. We asked if the judge be shown the documents so he could decide whether they're properly invoking national security. There's legal precedent for this. They refused to do that. But they prepared a 21-page, top-secret, ultra affidavit for the judge. Our lawyer didn't get to see it. They told him why they couldn't release the data. He was so impressed with that affidavit that he agreed with them. The public interest in disclosure is far outweighed by the potential danger to the security of the United States if this information was released. We appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals. They agreed with the lower court after seeing the same document. We tried to go to the Supreme Court. They wouldn't hear the case, so we filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the affidavit because the judge had mentioned it. This is what we got. That's 2 pages. It's 80% blacked out. Well, time marched on, and after a new special ruling about old documents, they released a larger percentage, only 20% blacked out. Well, I went after the CIA documents. You see, the NSA had found 23 CIA documents, which the CIA hadn't found when it did its court-ordered search. Who cares what the courts say? We're the CIA. We can do anything we like. Well, after 2 years, they released 11, I guess it was. And they were press abstracts of Eastern European newspaper articles about flying saucers, which the Russians had the day they were published. Their own documents, they refused to release. I appealed. After 3 years, I got 4 of them. I think that's what you'll see in the next slide, but let's take our chances. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. Well, I'll step ahead a little ways. They decided they could release the 156 UFO documents many years later. They used whiteout instead of blackout. When I called, having heard that they were going to put out a new list, the girl was reading an article from Philip Klass talking about my showing that blacked out document on national television, but never telling anybody about sources and methods, which of course I did. So they released 156 UFO documents. You can read about 1 line per page. Everything else is whited out. They're not covering anything up. Well, except that you can't read under the whiteout. Let's look at the next slide. In the next slide, you'll see more of the same. Real exciting stuff. In the next slide, this is one of the CIA documents that it took me 5 years to get. You can read 8 words on the page here. Very exciting stuff. Now, people have said, Stan, why don't you just scrape off the black? They Xerox it first. There's nothing under the black. They're not stupid. They may be illegal, immoral, and inappropriate, but they're not stupid. Next slide. Here's another one. I mean, but there is no cover-up. Why would they cover it up? If you go to my paper on the UFO why questions, you'll see a whole bunch of reasons. Larry asked me why the cover-up. I said, well, I give 6 reasons. He let me give 1. And then we went to a commercial. And I never got a chance to finish off the other 5. So go to the website. You can read all that stuff. There may be another slide. Let's try. What are the odds? Is there another slide? Yeah. Oh, yes. I love this one. No UFO reported, investigated, and explained by the United States Air Force, evaluated, has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. Now think about that. It doesn't say there aren't any flying saucers. It says that if any one of those 3 functions was done by somebody else, it would still be a true but totally meaningless statement. In other words, it's a cleverly crafted lie that doesn't mean anything. I mean, after all, the penguins in Antarctica aren't a threat to the security of the United States. They're real. Let me see if we got one more. I'm betting on this one. Let's try the next slide. Oh, yes, these are the statements by various and sundry prominent people. I better get over with this. Some of these are worth talking about. Isaac Asimov's. Almost every sighting is either a mistake or a hoax. These reports are riddled with hoaxes. And can you read that? And the flying saucer enthusiasts have so many cranks, freaks, and nuts among them that Hynek, J. Allen, is constantly running the risk of damaging his reputation. All non-explained sightings are from poor observers. That was Dr. Donald Menzel. He was a member of MJ-12, which some people will tell you doesn't exist, and you'll probably hear that Sunday. I had discovered that Menzel led a double life. And if you look at the quality evaluation for the sighting, you'll see that that statement is totally false. But it worked. It convinced a lot of members of the American Physical Society that that was the case. I won't go into the rest of these. They're in the paper, though. Let's look at the next slide. Let's see if we still got one. I can't read that. It's upside down? PowerPoint. I need you to go with me to get the PowerPoint right, if you remember the last time we did that. Let's look at the next, if there is a next. Is that all there are? Is there another slide? Well, if we all stand on our heads and turn around. Good. We finished all the wonderful slides. Let me try to say that Roswell has become the most known UFO case in the world. It's been attacked more than any other case. The Air Force has put out more paperwork about Roswell than any other case. The nasty, noisy negativists make it a favorite target. They don't do research, but they target it. The world has changed a great deal since then, since 1947. Not all of it for the better. It was a common thought that man was alone. It was a common thought that the world wasn't very old. 4004 BC, October 23rd, said Bishop Ussher. That's when it was created. Now we know that it's a lot older, it's a lot bigger, it's a lot different. We still think we're the crown of creation, though. I don't think we are. I think when people say, why would anybody come here? I got asked that question about 3 times today. I'll give you one simple word: quarantine. We're a threat to the neighborhood. We're a threat to ourselves, of course, as well. I think we're dealing with an unwillingness to see where we sit in the scheme of things. We're not the crown of creation. We are able to justify all the terrible things we do, but somehow it's good for the planet, good for the people. I've asked a lot of people, if you were an alien, would you want us out there? Invariably, the answer is no. We're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. Everybody in the neighborhood would be concerned about us taking our brand of friendship, which they all call hostility, out there. We can say that aliens do some things we don't approve of, abductions and so forth. Nothing aliens has done to us compares with what we have done to ourselves. I think it's time that we need to realize that flying saucers finished the job that Copernicus started of taking us out of the center of the universe. It's time we tried to see ourselves as others see us. It may not be a pretty picture, but we need to grow up. Thank you very much for listening.